Namaskar and a very warm welcome to the 20th edition of the Phone-In program. I'm Nidhi Kumar and you're watching India Science. Well, India has recorded less than 2 lakh COVID cases in the last 24 hours, with 1.65 lakh fresh infections, taking the overall case count to 2.78 crore. The positivity remains below the 10 mark for the sixth straight day amidst the battle against the second wave, and India has vaccinated 21.3 crores till today. Now, India's vaccination rate is now picking up after a little hiccup, and the important question that comes to my mind is how should one treat COVID-19 at home? Joining me today to address some of these questions on the question hour, I have none other than the very eminent Dr. Arvinder S. Soin, Padma Shri, Chairman and Chief Surgeon, Medanta Institute of Liver Transplantation, Senior Scientific Advisor, Medanta Institute of Education and Research, and the National Lead Investigator in this program, where you can ask your questions and we take your questions and queries live. Many thanks, Doctor, for joining us today, and welcome to the program, India Science. Namaste.
Good to be on the show, Nidhi. Thank you.
My question to you first, sir, is before we start taking on the viewers, is that is India really prepared for an inevitable, or should I say a possible third wave, sir?
Nidhi, what happens in pandemics is that waves happen as new sections of the population get exposed to the infection. So what happened in the first wave was that everybody was exposed, and being more susceptible because of age and comorbidities, people who were older and people who had comorbidities obviously got it worse in the first wave. And then the first wave subsided, and then the second wave came about 6 or 7 months later, where the younger population got exposed who were not vaccinated, the rural population got exposed, and we had the massive second wave. I'm afraid unless we believe that majority of the population of the country has already been affected by COVID, there's going to be a third wave. And the standard kind of gap between the two waves of this pandemic has been like somewhere between 4 and 6 months. So I'm afraid new sections of the population, and I think younger people, will be exposed, and there will be a third wave sometime 5-6 months from now. But the trick is in making sure that wave is flat, it's not as severe as the second wave. And to get to that point, we need to vaccinate fast. And until everyone, or at least 50 or 60% of the population is vaccinated, we have to continue to observe COVID appropriate behavior, which we all know is masking and proper masking, social distancing, and hand hygiene.
Yes, sir, I'm sure we all need to do that. And also, to add to what you said, India has only vaccinated up to, say, 4.2 people, 4.2% of its population as of now. So we really need to hurry that up. Meanwhile, we're joined by our first caller, Shikha from Mumbai. Namaste and welcome to India Science. Please ask your question, Shikha.
Namaste, ma'am. Namaste, sir. So my question is that we are hearing about so many fungus, black fungus, yellow, white, and recently I read about this new kind of fungus, aspergillosis fungal infection. Could you elaborate on this a bit? Tell us, should we be worried, or is it really, like that infectious and all?
Should I go
Yes, sir.
answer that?
Yes, absolutely.
So I couldn't hear it very clearly, but I think she's asking about fungal infection.
Absolutely, yes, sir. The new kind of fungal infection she mentioned, other than white, black, and yellow, there is another fungus that she's just mentioned. She'd like to understand from us what it is.
So let's understand why these fungal infections happen. And the reason for that is simple. They are opportunistic infections. They don't affect people who are normal, who don't have COVID, or who don't have immunosuppression, or who don't have diabetes. But people who've had, especially moderate to severe COVID, which is in itself a disease that suppresses the immunity, people who have diabetes, which is uncontrolled, or who have had moderate or high doses of steroids for a long time, or who have had IV antibiotics for a long time, or even oral antibiotics, they are the ones who are susceptible to having fungal infections. Now, if diabetes can be controlled and the use of or abuse or overuse of antibiotics and steroids can be controlled, then these infections won't happen. Now, these colors that are given to these fungal infections are not necessarily the colors of these fungi. These are basically the symptoms and signs and the kind of plaques that you see on patients, either inside the nose or the mouth or other areas. So the blackening happens because there is less blood supply, because the fungus actually blocks the blood vessels. And the white plaques happen typically with Candida. And similarly, the other colors of fungus that you keep talking about, they can all be equally devastating, and they all happen for the same reason. They can all be treated with antifungal drugs, and they will typically happen between 3 and 6 weeks after COVID recovery, especially from moderate or severe COVID with any of these conditions that I already talked about.
Thank you so much for answering that, and I hope that answers your question, Shikhaji. We now joined by another caller, Suraj from Delhi. Namaste, Suraj ji. अपना सवाल पूछिए. Please ask your question. Welcome.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. Sir, I have very basic question that how to take care of our liver during COVID-19.
That's a very fair question. Now, it all depends on whether you start with a normal liver or you have a liver problem. Now, if you start with a normal liver, then the good news is that while the liver has the same receptors, which means points of attachment on cells that the lung has for the virus, that means the virus does go and attach itself to the liver tissue. But the good news is that it doesn't do much to the liver. The liver is quite resistant, and COVID infection does not do much to the liver at all. It doesn't do much harm. It may elevate liver tests like bilirubin and SGOT, SGPT for a couple of weeks, but then they settle down. But it's not so good for people who already have liver disease. People who already have liver disease will unfortunately worsen their infection in the liver. That means the liver disease may get worse with COVID. Or if they have severe liver disease, then they may actually have complete liver failure with COVID infection. So the news is not so good for patients who already have liver disease, which is like a comorbidity. So you have to be extra careful. You have to contact your liver expert as well as a COVID physician if you already have a liver disease and contract COVID. So in terms of nutrition, you have to take fruits and vegetables, less salt, less oils, less processed food, and more fiber, good sleep, and some exercise. No alcohol. So that's what's going to help your liver.
I hope that answers your question, Suraj. We are now joined by another caller from Kolkata. Welcome to the program, Ruchi. Welcome to India Science. Please ask your question.
Namaste, sir. Namaste, ma'am. Thank you so much. I just heard about a COVID wonder drug, a kind of antibody cocktail drug for treating coronavirus. So I was just curious to know that whether it is effective or not.
I think she's talking about the Cipla, the one that Trump
took. The cocktail of antibodies.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So good. Now, actually, the scientists like me are very excited about this cocktail of monoclonal antibodies because monoclonal antibodies are actually the first antiviral drug that we have made against corona. All the other drugs that you hear about remdesivir, tocilizumab, steroids, these are all repurposed drugs. They existed for other diseases and we started using them for COVID. But these monoclonal antibodies, the so-called the cocktail that Cipla guys have introduced in India, in fact, there are two other combinations of monoclonal antibodies that are available in the US and they would soon be coming to India. All these are specific anti-COVID drugs. They should be given early in the first week when the virus is multiplying so that severe disease and death can be avoided. Ideally, these should be given as soon as you test positive for COVID. They're like any other antiviral or antibiotic. As soon as you discover that you have it, you treat yourself with these. In fact, it's just a single dose. Sometimes 2 doses are given. And there is 80% chance, and in some antibodies, even 85% chance that you will avoid severe disease. So yes, these could be game changers, but right now they're a bit expensive. And I'm very keen that some of the companies take it up in India and manufacture them at low cost.
Absolutely. And I think it's given in the form of a drip, if I'm not wrong, doctor.
That is correct.
By the name of
about half an hour or so.
Regeneron in United States, if I'm not wrong.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
They have difficult to pronounce names, but yeah, casirivimab and imdevimab.
Okay. Thank you so much for this information and thank you, Suraj. We're joined by yet another caller and this time from, we have Yashveer from Lucknow. Namaste Yashveer ji. Welcome to India Science. Please ask your question.
Sir, my question is, what technology has been used in development of the currently available vaccine in India?
I'm so sorry I missed that.
He's asking you to explain the technology behind the vaccine or what all has gone into the making of the vaccine. If you could share some thoughts on this, sir.
So that's a very wide-based question because there are several technologies that have been used in manufacturing vaccines. So what you should understand is that the virus, you've seen the pictures of the virus, it has several spikes. So the spike protein of the virus attaches to the human cells and all the vaccines do one basic function of inciting the antibody production in the body against the spike protein so that that spike protein of the virus cannot attach to human cells. So all the vaccines eventually will result in production of antibodies inside a human so that those antibodies prevent the attachment of spike protein to the human cell. That's the basic premise in all the vaccines. Now, some vaccines will inject the protein directly. Some vaccines will inject DNA or RNA, which turns into spike protein. Some vaccines will inject inactivated virus, which once the cell cover is removed, the spike protein will become available or exposed to the human cells. So the vaccine technologies differ, but the final endpoint is the same. They have to induce production of antibodies against the spike protein.
I hope that answers your question. Meanwhile, there is a YouTube question which I'd like to take, doctor. Permit me to ask you this question. And this comes from Ravi from Bhubaneswar. He's asking, why is it that the RT PCR tests being conducted recently are not able to, validate the variant or not able to show the patient to be positive, whereas the patient is suffering from COVID? Why is he escaping and coming negative in the RT PCR is the exact question.
Well, that's a very good question. So let me first clarify the doubt of positive and negative RT PCR. In the first wave, it was clear that more than 95% of the cases that have COVID, if they test positive, that means that they have it. And about 20 to 25% of them could be falsely negative. That means they've tested negative, but they actually have the virus. In the second wave, such number of cases have actually increased. So we are finding more often that people test negative and yet they have COVID. So whenever they have COVID symptoms, we treat them as COVID patients. So that's the first thing. So whenever somebody has fever, cough, breathlessness, less oxygenation, oxygen saturation falling to less than 95, then if they have fever going on for more than a week, then they have a CT scan of the chest, they have blood tests. So if they have these typical features of COVID, we will treat them as COVID, even if the tests are negative. The reason that the tests come negative sometimes are several. One is collection could be a problem. You don't go deep enough into the nose or the throat to test the sample, to take the sample. Second, the virus load on these surfaces of the nose and mouth and the throat may not be very high. There may be virus inside the lung, but the virus particles in the nose and throat area may be not in a very high quantity, and that is why they do not get detected. So these are the two main reasons. One is improper sampling, and two is inadequate amount of virus in the surfaces that you scrape for the test.
Absolutely, I think a very valid explanation there. Thank you so much, Doctor. We're joined by yet another caller, Roop from Chandigarh. Namaste, Roop. Welcome to India Science. Please ask your question.
Hello. Sir, my question is, we are hearing about so many variants these days, and now we have also come to hear about Vietnam variant and Singapore variant. So I wanted to know, are there such kind of variants, and if so, how dangerous are they? And if you could tell us a bit about it.
Sure. So the Vietnam variant and the Singapore variant are supposed to be mutations in the Indian variant. That's B1617. And what happens is that mutations or change in genetic material or genetic code or genetic identity happens in all organisms. Mutations happen even in human beings. They happen in bacteria, they happen in viruses. And viruses mutate to basically make sure that they survive. So if there are some drugs, some medicines that come up that kill a certain kind of virus, then they will mutate to another form so that they can escape that treatment killing effect. So that's why mutations happen in viruses. Now in COVID mutations or coronavirus mutations, typically what happens in different variants is that the mutations are in defined regions. They're just in about 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10 regions. But a spike protein has thousands of regions of genetic material. So the basic makeup of the spike protein doesn't change whatever the variant, and that is why majority of the vaccines that we have, if they are given in 2 doses, the full course is taken, then they will prevent severe disease and death in majority of the variants also. But yes, it is true that the original Wuhan strain against which they were devised, these vaccines, may not be as effective against the variants as against the original strain. But overall protective effect still remains because it's the same virus. And the spike protein, despite the mutations, is largely the same structure.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for explaining that. I hope that answers your query. And we move on to the next question, which is on YouTube, Dr. Soin. And the caller is wanting to know, essentially, there are 3 callers who are wanting to know how soon can we see a boost in vaccine supplies and how soon can we vaccinate our children? I know it's a little difficult, but please answer that, sir.
Well, I think pretty soon. All of us read and see the news, and it becomes very difficult to keep track of how many crores anybody is committing every day. But what I remember, the Serum Institute has said that they will be giving 12 crore doses in June. So some of that is existing supply, and I'm sure some is going to be manufactured. So that's quite a lot. And if you have the Sputnik and the Covaxin coming in, then I'm sure that the vaccine numbers are going to pick up very soon, in a week, 10 days. In fact, I think yesterday we vaccinated close to 30 lakh people. So, which is quite a good sign. So I think that the simple answer is that probably 60 or 70% of the adult population will be vaccinated by the end of the year. And the vaccination numbers will pick up in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think in July, August, we'll be vaccinating upwards of 50 lakh people a month. 50 lakh people a day.
Absolutely, and looks good so far, so good. We're joined by yet another caller, and he's a regular. So thank you, Hari ji, for joining us again today. Hari Sharma from Ghaziabad. Namaste. Please ask your question. We've lost that line. Meanwhile, sir, let me just ask you before we reconnect again to tell us a little bit about your take on using remdesivir and plasma therapy, and why do you think the WHO has also said it need not be used anymore?
Nidhi, what happens in a pandemic situation is that you clutch at straws.
Ji.
So when people are losing lives and we don't have a specific or didn't have a specific anti-COVID treatment, we tried other antiviral drugs like remdesivir. Now, the best science with remdesivir says that it does not save lives, but it shortens the recovery time. And that is why it was being used early in the first 7-8 days of the illness. But I, for one, never believed in remdesivir much, because at the end of the day, it was not made for coronavirus. Now, of course, remdesivir is soon going out of all the standard protocols because it doesn't really have much effect. In fact, it never did figure in a big way in our protocols, because we always believed that it did not save lives and it was not a specific anti-coronavirus drug.
Absolutely.
As far as plasma therapies,
Sir.
as far as plasma therapy is concerned, now you must understand that if plasma is given early in the viral replicative phase in the first week, this plasma is from people who've already had COVID, and it carries the same antibodies that we are trying to develop as monoclonals, which we just talked about a little while ago. But you see, those monoclonals are purified antibodies that are very effective against coronavirus, whereas the plasma contains a whole lot of antibodies, some of which are effective, some of which are not effective. And therefore, if you have a very high level of neutralizing antibodies in plasma and is given in the first 3 to 5 days, it may be effective. But general donation by a COVID recovered patient and plasma going to moderate and severe patients after 2 weeks is not going to be effective. So you see, you must understand what you're trying to do. It has antibodies, and if you give them early and if there are high level of neutralizing antibodies, it may be effective, but that's a small percentage. That's why at large, plasma therapy may not have much of a role, because the percentage of people it will benefit and the percentage of plasma donations that will have enough antibody may be 10, 20%. So the remaining 80, 90% will not benefit from it. And that's why it's being removed from the clinical protocols.
Absolutely. I think that is why ICMR also said no to plasma therapy in the protocols issued to the GOI. We now joined by Hari Sharma ji again. Welcome, Hari, and please ask your question.
Madam, my question is, what kind of precautions can we take to stop aerosol transmission?
So the precautions for stopping aerosol transmission are exactly what we've all been talking about, which you know as COVID appropriate behavior, which means not to come unprotected in the same room as someone who has COVID infection that you know of. And in general, stay at least 6 feet to 8 feet away, wear double mask, sanitize your hands. And these are the 3 or 4 things that you have to take care of. Now, people have talked about, circulating aerosols within rooms that have the same air conditioner unit, or in a hall or in a limited space. There is some transmission there, but if you're wearing a double mask, you're not going to catch COVID easily.
So thank you, Hari ji. I'm sure you've got the answer. And of course, ventilate, ventilate, ventilate. Sir, we have 2 questions on YouTube, and please permit me to ask you. The first question
Sure.
is, that the caller is asking, Vivek Shukla is asking, he's taken Covaxin, so he's not authorized international travel. How would you look at this probability of them allowing him? And the second sub question that he's asking is, after every 6 months of taking the dose, whether Covishield or Covaxin, are we supposed to go in for the booster dose?
So the first question is international travel. Did he say he had the Covishield?
Covaxin.
Covaxin. So the problem with Covaxin is not that it is not effective. I think it is effective. But Bharat Biotech and ICMR have not yet furnished the final phase 3 data to CDSCO DCGI. That means the Indian regulator has not received the final phase 3 data. And that is where things are stuck. And this data is expected to reach them in June, reach the WHO in June. Then WHO will hopefully certify Covaxin as an effective COVID vaccine. And after that, for international travel, especially with the requirement for vaccine passports, Covaxin will be permissible.
So thank you so much for that answer. And now we're joined by yet another caller, Sumita from Gwalior. Namaste, Sumita. Welcome to India Science. Please ask your question.
Namaste, ma'am. Hello, sir. So my question is, people with pre-existing liver diseases are at higher risk of death than people without. This I have often read, on internet. So, with your experience, could you, tell us, is that so? And in these times of COVID, how should one take care?
There is one more, sir, I'd like to interrupt. There's one more question on the YouTube, which is somewhat related to this. So we could perhaps club that in. There is a medication called L-carnitine that somebody has been taking, and now his sister has had a liver problem. So he wants to know whether she should continue this L-carnitine or not.
So the thing is that, first of all, let's talk about liver disease and COVID. We've already discussed this 20 minutes ago in this program, but maybe these viewers were not connected then. So yes, it is true that people who have pre-existing liver disease have a higher risk of getting worse COVID and also getting their liver disease go worse, both ways. So they can get severe COVID and the liver disease can also get worse. So people with mild liver disease can get into moderate and the severe stages, and people with severe liver disease can actually go into liver failure, and there is a 15-20% chance of mortality if somebody already has severe liver disease and gets moderate to severe COVID. Now, obviously, the best way to protect yourself is COVID-appropriate behavior and vaccination. So if you have liver disease, then you're a person with a comorbidity, and you must rush in for your vaccine if it's available. And L-carnitine is not a problem. It can be had. You can continue it, and you can have the vaccine, or even if one gets COVID infection, it's not an issue, and you're not more likely to have it because you're on L-carnitine.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm afraid, viewers, we're running out of time. And in the end, I'd like to thank Dr. Arvinder Soin for joining us today. We'd love to have you for many more such programs. And with this, this is the wrap of this edition of the Phone In. We understand that these uncertain times where one has to go out and there is no other option, under those circumstances, please make sure that your meeting is as shut as possible and keep as much distance as possible. Always have your double mask or triple mask on, and remember, mask up India and take the jab. On that note, namaskar, many thanks for watching.